Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Easypower Tuesday Refresher Series of webinars. My name is Jim Chastain. I'm an applications engineer here at Easypower. And the primary purpose of this series is to cover a bit more in depth on specific aspects of the tools and some of the features that may not be covered as often as they should be or needed to be in day-to-day use. Today, we're going to discuss the capabilities of the label template editor. Turns out with a better understanding of these features, the person conducting the arc flash hazard assessment can augment the implementation of client policies and training requirements, and in my opinion, extend the documentation required by the standards. In other words, potentially bring more value to the table to help the client achieve an improved standing in terms of overall compliance. More on that later. As we are in the habit of doing, I'd like to start the session with a couple poll questions just to engage the audience and to get a little bit of perspective on everyone's position on the topic. So if you would please participate. There's no obligation or liability. First is, as part of an arc flash study, how often do you need to provide a custom label? So again, just kind of indicate your status or thoughts on this. We will hopefully cover some of the details that either support your position or maybe consider taking a different position going forward. We do appreciate your attendance. Most of all of these presentations are recorded and available on the website for later viewing and review. And certainly if you've got questions on any of this, you're welcome to contact tech support or me if you have, again, specific requirements. Okay, looks like we've got a consensus here. Here's how people have weighed in. I'm a little bit surprised and impressed that a third of the audience finds the need for utilizing custom labels most of the time or all of the time. And then how often does your customer client require a site specific PPE? This is a little bit more esoteric, and it's kind of where the basis of this discussion is coming from. And so frankly, I'd appreciate feedback as we go along, whether or not you have a question or not. Your experience is valuable, and I appreciate comments. May not necessarily share them on the broadcast. Okay, it looks like we have a quorum here. And here's how people have weighed in. Again, pleasantly surprised that half the audience has been involved with site-specific PPE requirements. That's good to know. All right, well, let's get on to my agenda. So I plan to spend a little bit of time talking about some terminology issues and some historical evolution of the way the verbiage is covered on this topic in the standards, and then have some templates and examples of how to incorporate some of these features in Easypower specifically. Now, just not that I'm covering any new ground here, but if you look at the way OSHA defines these terminology, the danger exists, and if it's not avoided, it will cause death or serious injury. A warning basically is used if it's not heeded, it can cause death or serious injury. And then the term caution is if it's not precautions not taken, it may cause minor or moderate injury. Now, the reason for kind of covering this ground is tied into the definitions or the standard ANSI Z 535.4, which is the standard regarding field marking for hazards. Again, these are consensus standards, and so it's not like this is the law as opposed to the OSHA specifics, but the benefit of following these standards means there's less training required. A technician can be trained in a general knowledge of the topic and then be able to pick up on an individual employer based upon where the work is to be done. But there are specific color and sign designations for each of these terms. And again, these come into play and when we talk about the way NFPA 70E dictates fill marking. Now, in the electrical hazard world or electrical systems world, there's basically three hazards that should be considered. The first two are covered by NFPA 70E, and that's electroshock and the arc flash hazard. The electroshock is based on the voltage level, and the primary protection is going to be either distance from the exposed conductors or layers of PPE. Same is true for arc flash, but specifically that hazard is determined by a calculation in the standards that we've discussed frequently, specifically IEEE 1584 being the most commonly used. What is not covered in detail in either of these methods is a hazard described as arc blast, and it's not directly related to instant energy level. It's more related to the available current, the arcing current, and then the distance from that explosion and how short the time is. The shorter the time required to dump that current into the fault, the higher the potential for an arc blast, or the more severity potentially as a result. It was predicted in a paper by Ralph Lee in 1987 labeled The Pressure Developed by Arcs. So the point being that this is all knowledge that's in the ether, and as information evolved, the specifications in NFPA 70E from 2002 up until 2012 implemented or utilized a chart or a description similar to this, which was referred to as the HRC category or hazard risk category. Now I've got this marked out because in 2015, specifically, the instructions were not to refer to HRC in any manner, way, shape, or form, and for sure don't have HRC nomenclature on the label. Now, the significance here is prior to this time frame, the HRC, the category itself, basically topped out at 40 calories, and the admonition was no work is done above that 40 calorie limit because there was no specified PPE in the market. Well, in 2015, whether we were aware or not, there was the development of higher capability PPE. And so at that time, that HRC category was done away with, and the ability to reference it or the requirement to not reference it was built into the standard and labeling, and we're referred to a new table 130.5 which describes the PPE, the arc flash PPE for instant energy analysis. And so in the old standard, basically you'd calculate your instant energy, and if it fell between these two columns, that would give us the category for PPE that was being used. Some people wrote their manuals, their safety manuals around this nomenclature. And so when 2015 came along and that nomenclature was no longer valid, the pushback or the alarm, if you will, was, wait a minute, what am I going to do with all these labels that have HRC on them? And what about my manuals that I've spent a lot of money not only developing, but promulgating to my staff? And these involve some very large companies. So going forward, and still as far as the standard today, we're referred to table 130.5, which describes if we've calculated the instant energy, then we pick a PPE that's rated to or exceeding that level that was been calculated. And so there's two categories, one that's up to between 1.2 calories and 12 calories, and one with instant energy exposures greater than 12 calories. The claim now is that above 40 calories, it's no longer dangerous work as long as you have on the correct PPE. So there's a migration in labeling suggestions, if you will. Now further, if we take this discussion into the standard NFPA 70E under Article 130.5, talks about equipment labeling, and these are the required data that's required on the label itself: voltage, the arc flash boundary, and at least one of the following: the available instant energy, again calculated during the study, or the arc flash category if you haven't calculated the instant energy, but not both. In other words, we can't use a category and we can't use instant energy at the same time, that category being from the lookup table 130.7. Now, the one out that was given to us at the time this was released in 2015 is, as an alternative, one of the following lists shows the minimum arc rating of the clothing. Now, again, that's exactly what we're talking about, calculating the instant energy, but we're also given the ability to do site-specific level of PPE. And this, in my opinion, was offered to the companies that had already described hazard risk categories and utilizing that nomenclature, and the potential to be able to not have to rewrite all my manuals, but just go in and define what my categories would be and use that as the alternative to referring to HRC. So again, we can't refer to HRC when we're talking about levels of PPE. Okay, so that's almost well, it's 6-7 years old trend, and most of the clamor has kind of settled down. But that brings us to the potential now for doing site-specific PPE and what that means. A case in point is that the electrical hazards can overlap or overlay other hazards involved, and the ability to incorporate some of that information where we have PPE for instance, toxic chemicals or for falling, and there may be a need to combine the labels for that kind of safety factor. Again, this ends up being a problem, if you will, or the opportunity based upon how complicated my system is, what type of factory I have, and what works for me may not necessarily work for somebody else. So what I want to do is show some examples of how to utilize the Easypower template editor and incorporate several different policies, if you will, or standards, if you will, and talk about how to utilize the label editor accordingly. So what all this kind of correlates to is, if I go into my short circuit focus on this typical radial system, fault all the buses, my arc flash labeling is tied to my arc flash hazard report, and if I select that spreadsheet, it makes available to me the label editor, and I have a number of templates that are available and installed with the tool. And so by default, let's use the term loosely. I'm going to kind of go through this, comparing these different standards. So if I choose a 4x6 die cut with 2021 with the warning, what I get is a label that shows me warning even if I get up above 40 calories. For instance, here's a 59 calorie calculated instant energy, and I'm still saying there's a warning as long as I utilize the PPE that's suggested on table 130.5. Now, there's nothing wrong with that as long as I'm training the people to understand that this, in fact, is a significant hazard, and it's important that they utilize the correct PPE. Now, it may be just me, but I personally, if I were the facility manager, I'd be concerned about this level of hazard for a number of reasons. So let's say I wanted to take a different position or use a different template. So I might develop a template that looks like this. And this will be something that we're kind of previewing for a warning. Again, easier to read. The idea is that we're promulgating information on both the shock hazard and the arc flash hazard. But again, we're following the recommendation that even above 40 calories, it's not necessarily a dangerous situation as long as we have on the correct PPE. Now, the one thing that's included here is a QR code, because with this, I can have my complete arc flash PPE description available to anyone that scans this QR code, and I just maintain that information on the website that's linked to this particular QR code. Now, so let's kind of take this a step further. Let's say I do want to, just my policy, I'm not talking about any standards necessarily or recommendations, but let's say I did want to follow the recommendation for a danger label, which required a color change and a style change. And the tool allows me now to have both the warning for the low energy and danger for the high energy. Now, again, this is not fighting any standard. This is strictly a policy that I, as the facility manager, want to emphasize to my people that that there's a potential that they pay attention to protect themselves if they have to work in this area. Now, if we take this a step further and we look at a derivation that allows me to implement a policy, let's say I want to define a site-specific PPE to enforce a policy that's based upon the range of the instant energy. So for starters, I don't want to allow hot work above 40 calories. I don't want my PPE level to be determined by the range of the instant energy. So I've limited my available PPE to 2 calorie and 8 calorie and then 40 calorie. So anything that's 2 calorie or less, I want to show a 2 calorie PPE. Anything that's between 2 and 8 calories, I want to show a level 8 or category 8 PPE. And then anything above the 8, I want to make sure that it's labeled for 40 calorie work, and then no hot work above 40. So again, how to implement that in the standard, or rather in the label itself. So I'm going to go into my label designer and look at how this has been implemented. So for starters, I've picked out the warning text, and if the instant energy is greater than 40, then it's going to label it with danger. And by default, if it's less than 40, it's going to show warning. And this is the fuzzy logic, if you will, that allows me to have this change based upon the instant energy for that particular bus. In addition, I have a black warning flag for the warning of instant energy below 40 calories. I don't know if you can see this over here on the right, but if the instant energy is less than 40 calories, my warning indicator is a black triangle. For a greater than 40 calories, I use a white warning image and make it conditional upon the instant energy being greater than or equal to 40 calories. So the tool has the ability, based upon what instant energy we're reading from that spreadsheet, that we can change the color and the display of virtually any image that's on the screen. Likewise, we can change the verbiage, the text. By default would be warning. If it gets above 40 calories, it'll go to danger. And then in addition, we have the color is conditional upon the instant energy, and by default, it's going to be black. If it goes above 40 calories, it goes to white. So that's how I can control both the text and the color. In terms of this nomenclature, which is the PPE category that we've defined, again, if I have, and it's a staged instant energy based on instant energy. So at 2 calories or less, this image is going to be 2, category 2 or 2 calories. At 8 calories or less, this is going to be 8. Let's see if I have a bus that's at 8 calories. There's one. And then if it's anything above 8 and below 40, let's see if I find one of those. Then I'd use 40 calorie. And the bottom line, when I get to over 40 calories, this does not allow hot work. So the point being, I have a site-specific designation that implements a policy that I've trained my people to follow, and this can be documented and carry with it the proof that that this is the way the labels are affixed to the panels in the field, and people are trained to follow that information. Okay, so now I'm not, just bear in mind, I'm not saying anything about the standard. I'm not saying anything about 40 calories or whether or not it's a dangerous situation over 40 calories. I'm just saying there's a flexibility in the tool itself that gives me the ability to implement a policy that the facility manager wants to implement. And consequently, by discussing that policy with them, I can design a label that enforces that, and it would be essentially proof that the employees are reminded of the way the training is taking place. Okay, so I got a lot of people talking at me. What's the max PPE range? So we're just, when we talk about PPE, for instance, this is just a number in Easypower. So whatever number I pick out here is the level that is, I think we're limited to 3 digits. So potentially this number could go to 999, which is incidental, has nothing to do with instant energy itself. How can we change? I think the question is, how can we change the text here of the calories per square centimeter? And you can change the text itself, make a different size, and then copy and paste this at a different location, if that's what you're asking, Mike. So bottom line is we have the ability to create a label that has conditional data on it, and it allows the ability to change the contents of the label based upon the results of the study. Virtually all the parameters that are calculated in the study are available on the spreadsheet, and we can control that information by, using that information, we can control the visibility, the color, the image files itself, and even the QR symbol content. So again, site-specific designation has no reference to hazard risk category. We need to define what those levels are in our documentation. We need to document the site-specific criteria and company safety procedures that can be implemented utilizing some of the label contents. And most importantly of all is to be able to train the employees to understand and follow company procedures and the meaning of the label guidance. So the intent is to show more capability in the label template editor. Again, once we've developed a specific template, we save that under a different name so that we can have we haven't contaminated the original template, and we would label it with something that means something regarding has a bearing on what that label content would be. I appreciate everyone for attending today. I would like to remind folks that we've started to schedule a live regional training now starting in the 4th quarter. You're welcome to check the newsletter and the website for online training and videos on the use of Easypower. You can contact tech support at easypower.com or me. Thank you for supporting Easypower and appreciate you all attending today's webinar. Have a good day.